What's up, kings and queens? It's your boy Dan from Daft Previews, and I'm here once again to give you the most comprehensive NBA player prop previews you are going to see today. Included are my best bets, probably a parlay or two. You know what it is, hashtag BAP. Now, we just had another winning day, 5.8 units won yesterday, over 20 units made for the week. Absolutely killing it right now. If it's your first time seeing these videos, what I do is I share outlier.bet. I take you through all the key players, take you through their matchups, tell you what I like, and I tell you what I don't. And I do all this to give you all the information that you need to make the best bets possible. Now, if that sounds interesting, let's go. So we're kicking things off with the New Orleans Pelicans versus Detroit Pistons. Brandon Ingram is still out for the Pelicans, and Jalen Duren is a game time decision in this one, as well as Taj Gibson and Simone Fontecchio. But let's jump into it. A lot of props available right now. We'll start with Cade Cunningham. Now, Cade Cunningham's got to be one of the best players to bet on this season. I find myself betting on him at least half the time. Now, looking at his points prop first, he's covered this line of 21.5 in 5 out of his last 10 games. Now, the matchup is somewhat difficult against the Pels. The last time he played them, he did score 22 points, so that line seems just about right. Now, taking a look at his assist prop, we can see he's covered in 8 out of his last 10 games. He's covered 6.5 assists. Once again, slightly difficult matchup, but he did record 11 assists the last time that they played. So, given his recent form, how do you not lean to the over? But at minus 150, I guess that's enough to make me hesitate. Looking at his rebound prop of 4.5, he's covered in 6 out of his last 10. Once again, a difficult matchup, and he had 2 boards the last time he versed the Pels. I'm actually leaning towards 2 plays for Cade Cunningham. The very first one I'm looking at is his first quarter point. So you're looking at 5.5 points there. Now, I know the matchup is somewhat difficult, but we only need 3 buckets from Cade, potentially 2 3-pointers. Now, he's covered this in 8 out of his last 10 games. And in the last head-to-head matchup, he did score 8 points in that first quarter. So what I'll do when I'm done recording this video, I'll dive in a little bit deeper, look into his minutes played, his shot attempts, and all that type of stuff to see whether I like this play. But there's a good chance that I'll take his over in points. The other play that I'm considering is his rebounds plus assists. So it's 11.5. He's hit this in 8 out of his last 10 games. This is a difficult matchup for both his rebounds and assists, but that's why we see a slightly lower line. But I think it's still worth considering. So I'll be looking into that. I don't like as much as his first quarter points, but we'll see. So check that pin comment. Should be updated an hour after I upload this video. Jump into the next set of players. Who do we have for Detroit? We've got Jaden Ivey. His points line, 16.5. He's covered in 1 of his last 5 games, 3 out of his last 10. And in head-to-head matchups, he's gone under in 3 consecutive games for the Pelicans. I guess out of all the positions for the Pels, shooting guards and centers are probably the position that they allow the most points to. So despite the form, I'd be a little bit hesitant. So I was leaning on this. I just didn't get a good feeling about it. One thing to keep in mind in his last 3 games against the Pelicans, he played 21, 34, and 21 minutes. He's playing about 34 minutes a night at the moment. So I think he will get quite close, but I do lean to the under on this one for Jaden Ivey. His assist prop, he's covered this in 6 out of his last 10. He does have a great matchup for this game. Has covered in 1 out of his last 3 games against the Pels. So line only 3.5. And for a while there, he was hitting it very consistently. But as of late, it's too inconsistent for me to consider. Jalen Duren, here's a game time decision. What's he suffering from? Back spasm. So that doesn't sound like fun at all. He has a good matchup here. He has covered this line in 4 of his last 10 games. Went under in 2 consecutive games against the Pelicans. Turning to his rebound line of 10.5, he's covered in 4 out of his last 10 and 1 of his last 2 against the Pels. So, yeah, I'm not loving it. And especially knowing that he's got back spasms, I'd be even more hesitant to take any overs for Jalen Duren. Looking at these Pels, see what's so his points prop of 25.5, he's covered in 5 out of his last 10. Most players in the Pelicans are going to have a good matchup here because the Pistons aren't great defensively. And his last matchup against Detroit, he did score 29 points, but this was back in 2022. So I wouldn't put too much stock into that form. That was 2 years ago. His assist prop, 5.5. He's covered in 3 of his last 10 games. And his rebound prop, 6.5. He's covered in 7 out of his last 10. So I actually did take his rebound prop against Miami with all this good form leading up to it. Only finished on 5. So The matchup, not the greatest one, so I'm not saying take the under. I just wouldn't be confident in backing the over there for Zion. We've got Trey Murphy steps into a bigger role with Brandon Ingram out of the lineup. So Trey Murphy's covered this line in 5 of his last 10 games. Did play Detroit in January of last year, though. He did score 19 points back then. What I'd be interested in seeing is, because he does have a good matchup here, is how does he perform without Brandon Ingram? So we can see in his last 10 games, without Brandon Ingram, he's only covered this line in 3 out of those 10 games. So the line's a little bit high, but it makes sense. I get it. The matchup isn't overly difficult at this point in time. And he's very capable of having some big games. It's just hard to predict when. So, yeah, I'd be a little bit hesitant to bet on Trey Murphy. CJ McCollum stepped up in that one game without Ingram, most recently against Miami. Check that out. Scored 30 points. So he's only covered this line of 20.5 in 2 out of his last 10 games, 1 out of his last 3 against the Pistons. His assist prop is covered in 3 out of his last 10, 2 out of his last 3 against the Pistons, and his rebound prop, 6 out of his last 10, and 2 of his last 3 against the Pistons. So out of all of these, probably the points prop gets my interest. Detroit do allow a lot of points to point guards, but CJ, hella inconsistent. Did take 21 shots in that last game against Miami. Pelicans did destroy them, but is that just because Brandon Ingram was out? Let's quickly check it. See how he plays when Brandon Ingram's absent, and check that out. You can see he's covered this line in 7 out of his last 10 games without Brandon Ingram. In this particular game where he only scored 2 points, he only played 14 minutes. So pretty good hit rate for CJ McCollum without Brandon Ingram. I'm going to add that to my short list of things to look into. All right, who else do we have? Herb Jones. Let's have a look at Herb Jones. So his points props at 12.5, 3 out of his last 10. Scored 21 points the last time he played the Pistons. The main thing that I wanted to look into actually was his 3-point prop. So I'm actually considering an under in his 3-point prop. So under 1.5 threes. And that's because the Pistons don't allow many 3-pointers, only 12 per game. And that's because they allow a lot of points at the rim. So Herb Jones, he's attempting 2.9 3-pointers per game in his last 10. And he hasn't hit this line in 8 out of his last 10. He's gone under. One game against the Raptors, he did score 5. But outside of that, he scored 2 against Brooklyn. So I'd be thinking he needs to have at least 4 to 5 attempts in order to hit these. He's shooting them at 41%, but I just can't see him needing to take 5 3-pointers in this game, given the Pelicans should be get points at the rim at ease. And if Duran's out, it makes it even easier. So this is one play that I'm sitting on at the moment. I'm considering it. It's a very strong lead of mine, and I might end up taking that bet. Jumping to the next game, it's the Los Angeles Clippers versus the Philadelphia 76ers. In this game, Norm Powell, Daniel Tice, PJ Tucker, all game time decisions for this one. The 76ers, a lot of players still out. Let's see what we got here. We'll start with these 76ers. We'll start with Tyrese Maxey. Points prop here is at 26.5. He's hit this in 4 of his last 5, which is great. 6 out of his last 10. The matchup, not overly difficult. Did score 22 points the last time he versed the Clippers, though. Assist-wise, 5.5. He's covered in 3 of his last 10. Went under the last game against the Clips. And his rebound line's at 3.5. 3 out of his last 10. And he went under last time versing the Clippers. So what you'll find is Max is capable of some massive games, but he does tend to go under. He's just one of those players. Looking at his PRA, 5 out of his last 10. It's just a very difficult one to get a read on, to be honest. So I've considered taking it on Tyrese Maxey before. I think I might have taken a Tyrese Maxey under this season. It would have been a game where he scored 40 or 50 points. So I learned my lesson real quick. Let's check out Kelly Oubre. His line of 18.5. He's covered this in 7 out of his last 10 games. The matchup is not too bad. So the hit rate's pretty good here. And looking at his assist numbers, 1.5, 6 out of his last 10, and rebounds 5.5, 6 out of his last 10 as well. I think the points prop might not be a bad play because the matchup there isn't too bad here against the Clippers. They don't defend threes very well. So he's playing 34 minutes a night, very consistent. And his shot attempts are very consistent as well. So the problem with that, with a lot of consistency, it's very easy for the books to kind of get sharp with their lines. But if you take him for 15 points, for example, in the BAP. I can definitely see that coming home. But the line at 18.5, it feels like it's right on the money. Actually, I might even take that up to 19.5. So 18.5 at minus 105. I don't hate that statistically. I think if we had the same chance to run this bet every single time, I think it would hit it about 60%. So let me add Kelly Oubre to my short list. I'll do some line shopping. I might be able to find him 17.5 at pretty good odds. So that's not too bad. Who else screams out to me? Tobias Harris. We don't do Tobias Harris props anymore. So let's get straight into the Clippers. Paul George. So his points prop here, 23.5. So this is something that I'm leaning on at the moment. It's purely because in his last 5 games, he's really turned the corner. He's getting buckets. He's shooting at a pretty good percentage. His shot attempts are pretty high. He's shooting at about over 50%, 53% in his last 10 games. So that shot percentage is up, and he's also starting to get to the line consistently. So I don't hate that at all. And the matchup is not too bad against the Philadelphia 76ers. He has gone under in 2 consecutive head-to-head games against them, though. These were last season. So given his recent form, I definitely lean to the over right now for PG. He's in form. His assist number, 3.5. 4 of his last 10. 2 straight against Philly. And then his rebound prop of 5.5. He does have a good matchup here, but he's only hit this in 3 of his last 10 games and 1 of his last 2 against Philly. The Claw, Kawhi Leonard. His points line, 23.5. His matchup isn't bad either. He's hit this in 5 of his last 10 and in 2 consecutive games against Philly. His assist prop, 3.5. 3 of his last 10, but he's gone under in 6 consecutive games, and he's hit in 1 of his last 2 against the 76ers. And rebound line, so that's 6.5. He's only covered this in 2 out of his last 10. He does have a great matchup, though. 76ers allow a lot of rebounds to power forwards, but in head-to-head matchups, Kawhi Leonard has gone under in 2 straight. So I do have a lean on this game, this player, and I'm actually looking at potentially taking it under in his rebounds plus assists. It's 9.5. So he's cashed the under in 8 out of his last 10 games, which is pretty good. In his last 20, he's gone under 12 times. So it's really just his recent form that has my attention, where he's been going under this rebounds and assist prop. The matchup for rebounds is probably the only concern that I have. His rebound chances, they're down though. So they give up a lot of rebounds to power forwards. Kawhi Leonard really is a 3, but playing the 4 in the modern era, his rebound chances aren't very high. And his rebound line is at 6.5. Half of these games, he didn't even get 6 rebound chances. So, yeah, I'm leaning to the under here for Kawhi Leonard. So stay tuned. Check out the pinned comment. See if I land on that. Outside of that, we've got James Harden. So James Harden's points prop here is 16.5. Tough matchup here against Philly. He's covered this in 4 out of his last 10. His assist prop, 8.5. 6 out of his last 10. 3 consecutive games now. And his rebound prop at 5.5. Only 2 out of his last 10. Jumping in the Cleveland Cavaliers versus the Miami Heat. Now we've got Jaime Jaquez Jr., Martin, and Evan Mobley, all game time decisions. So very interesting one. Evan Mobley coming back does change a few things, especially defensively for the Cleveland Cavs. Jaquez and Martin, very reliable wings, can play multiple positions, defend a lot of players. That could impact the opportunities for everybody on that Miami team. So interested to see how this one plays out. But let's get started with some players that we know are playing. So we'll start with Jared Allen. We'll get through the Cavs players first. So his points prop here is at 16.5. He does have a difficult matchup against Bam Adebayo, but he's covered in 6 of his last 10. Up against the Heat, though, 1 out of his last 7. But the one game he did cover was the most recent one where he scored 25 points against Miami. That was this week. That wasn't that long ago. And I think in that game, I was actually leaning towards his under. Lucky I didn't take the bet, but ended up cashing. But if Evan Mobley comes back, I'll probably lean to the under there for Jared Allen. His rebound prop, 11.5. He's covered in 5 of his last 10. He had 20 rebounds in that last game against Miami, which is crazy. He's covered in 3 out of his last 7. So Miami is sure to make adjustments, especially after Jared Allen absolutely destroyed them. So I'd be very tentative taking any bets on him. Darius Garland, his points prop 20.5, 3 of his last 10, and only 2 of his last 6 against the Miami Heat. He does have a difficult matchup when it comes to scoring some points. And if we look at his assist prop, the line's at 6.5. He's covered in 6 out of his last 10. He does have a pretty decent matchup here And in head-to-head matchups, he's covered in 3 out of his last 6 against Miami. His rebound props at 2.5. He's covered in 4 out of his last 10 games. He's gone under in 6 consecutive games against the Miami Heat. So I've got 2 leans really for Darius Garland. One of them is points plus rebounds, taking the under in his points plus rebounds, so under 23.5. Now, he's cashed the under in this in 7 out of his last 10. He does have a difficult matchup in scoring and in rebounding against the Miami Heat. And in head-to-head matchups, he's cashed the under in 3 consecutive games against Miami now. So 4 out of his last 6. So that's one of the leans that I have. The other lean that I have is another under. And just let me copy and paste this down so I don't forget that it was one of my leans. And I'll take you straight through it. Other lean for Darius Garland, first quarter prop. And I'm leaning towards the under here in his first quarter prop. So check that out. 5.5. He's gone under 5.5 points in 8 out of his last 10 games. What's better? He's gone under in 17 of his last 20 games, under 5.5 points. And against Miami Heat, he's gone under in 4 of his last 6. So his last 3 games, he has gone under. So that's another strong lean of mine. Obviously, I want to check his activity, his minutes, and all that type of stuff. So just wanted to share that with you all, give you a bit more context. So when you see why I place the bets, hopefully you have a better understanding. Jumping into this Miami Heat team, though, let's have a look at Bam Adebayo. So Bam's points prop, 17.5, 5 out of his last 10. And he's covered in 3 out of 4 games against Cleveland. When he has covered it, it's been barely. So, yeah, I'd be a little bit hesitant to take Bam just based on those numbers. Bam actually didn't play in that most recent matchup where Jared Allen had 20 rebounds, which makes a lot of sense. So, it gives me more reason to potentially take the under for Jared Allen. But looking at his rebound prop, though, 4 out of his last 10, 1 out of his last 4 against Cleveland. So, Bam hasn't got it done there. And with his assists, 6 out of his last 10 games, 2 out of his last 4 against Cleveland. So not getting any strong feelings out of Bam. Let's check Jimmy Butler. 22.5. He's covered in 4 out of his last 10, and he's hit in 4 out of his last 6 against the Cavs. His assist line at 5.5. He's covered in 3 out of his last 10, 1 out of his last 6 against Cleveland. His rebound line, 3 out of his last 10, and he's gone under his rebounds in 6 consecutive games. Now, stylistically, good matchup. The Cavs do allow the second most rebounds to small forwards in the league this season. But Jimmy hasn't been hitting it quite well as of late, and he hasn't hit it against Cleveland, full stop, in the past 2 years. But, yeah, I don't know. Jimmy Butler does scare me. He can get a lot of rebounds real quick. So, yeah, we shall see. Terry Rozier. I do have a lean on him as well, actually, but let's check his props. Points-wise, he's got a tough matchup. He's hit this in 3 out of his last 10. He did score 24 points most recently against Cleveland. His assist prop of 4.5. 3 out of his last 10. Only had 2 assists against Cleveland. And his rebound prop of 4.5. He's hit this in 6 out of his last 10. Does have a difficult matchup here against Cleveland. And he only had 3 rebounds the last time that they played. In that game, only had 5 rebound chances. So he's probably going to be the one who chase Darius Garland around. So he might not be able to be in position to get a lot of those rebounds. But let's go to the lean, what I'm looking at here. I do like the under in his rebounds. I do like the under in his assists. So I thought if I put them all together, why not? So I'm looking at the under here in his rebounds plus assists. He's cashed the under in 7 of his last 10 games. He does have a difficult matchup for rebounds and assists. And obviously the last time he played, he only had 3 rebounds and 2 assists. So it's another one that I'll be looking into a little bit later. Jumping into the next game, it's the Golden State Warriors versus the Minnesota Timberwolves. Anthony Edwards, once again, is a game-time decision, as well as Rudy Gobert. The Warriors, fully healthy. Believe it or not, the retirement home, they're all healthy. They're walking around. They're nice and mobile. So we'll start with the Warriors first. Klay Thompson, off the bench, has been getting busy. He's covered 16.5 now in 7 out of his last 8 games, 4 consecutive games in a row. Does have a difficult matchup here against the Timberwolves, who are pretty good defensively. In head-to-head matchups, he's only covered in 2 out of his last 6 against the Timberwolves. But if Klay Thompson's coming off the bench, he'll be spending a lot of time up against that second unit. So I don't hate that for Klay. Jonathan Kuminga. So his points prop, 17.5. His matchup is difficult. He's covered in 7 out of his last 10 games, though. Only scored 11 points against the Indiana Pacers, and in that game, he had a great matchup and he failed to deliver. Against the Timberwolves, he's gone under in 6 consecutive games. Obviously, he hasn't played a lot of minutes in those games, but still has had his struggles with them in the past. Steph Curry, his points prop 24.5. Tough matchup here against Minnesota. He's covered this line in 6 of his last 10. And in head-to-head matchups, he's covered in 3 out of his last 4. In November, he versed the Wolves and scored them for 38 points. So I don't mind that for Steph Curry. In a game like this, well, I don't mind this for Steph Curry if Anthony Edwards and Rudy Gobert play. My thought process around that is if the Timberwolves field a pretty strong team, Steph Curry is going to need to be great in order for them to have a chance to win. I found he goes under in a lot of games where he doesn't need to necessarily perform. So Steph Curry over in points is a lean, but I'd probably have to wait for Anthony Edwards and Gobert news to pop. His assist line, he's keyed in 6 of his last 10, 2 of his last 4 against the Timberwolves, and his rebound line of 3.5, 7 out of his last 10. He's hit in 4 consecutive games against Minnesota, but the matchup is a difficult one. So yeah, I'd lean to the over there for sure for Steph Curry. 4 rebounds doesn't seem like a lot. But his rebounding is down this year compared to previous years. Andrew Wiggins, his points prop of 10.5. He's hit this in 6 of his last 10, 2 out of his last 4 against the Timberwolves. No one looks at his assist prop. Let's check out his boards. 4.5. He's covered in 6 out of his last 10. 5 consecutive games now he's covered this rebounding prop. The matchup is not too difficult. And in head-to-head matchups, he's covered in 2 out of his last 4 against the Wolves. Brandon Podziemski. His point prop here is 8.5. He's covered in 4 out of his last 10, 1 of his last 2 against the Timberwolves. Assist-wise, you're looking at 3.5, 6 out of his last 10, 1 out of 2 against the Wolves. And his rebound prop of 5.5, 4 out of his last 10, and 1 out of 2 against the Wolves. So, yeah, I'm not really loving many of these Warriors players. Klay Thompson, Steph Curry, believe it or not, they're the ones that I probably like the most. But let's take a look at Anthony Edwards. Firstly, let's get reminded of what the injury is. It's still that dislocated finger from when he smacked it on John Collins' head, I think. But let's look at his points prop. 29.5. He's covered this in 5 out of his last 10. In head-to-head matchups, he's covered in 1 of his last 6 against the Golden State Warriors. His assist props at 4.5. He's covered in 6 out of his last 10, 3 out of his last 6 against the Warriors. His rebounding prop, 7 out of his last 10 games, but he has hit in 6 consecutive games now. Tough matchup here against the Warriors, and he's covered this in 2 out of his last 6. I do have a lean on Anthony Edwards, depending on if he plays or not, but this is what I'm considering. The odds have actually moved since I last looked at it, but looking at over 9.5 rebounds plus assist, purely because he's been absolutely killing it as of late. It's been a lean of mine for if you guys watch this show every night, you'd know it's probably 3 or 4 games now. I've been leaning on Anthony Edwards overs in rebounds and assists, and I haven't taken it many times because the matchup has been difficult, but he just continues to excel, getting a lot of boards, getting a lot of assists. Rudy came back in the Cleveland game, and Anthony Edwards still got a lot of rebounds, so he's going up and up and up. I might even take it at 10.5. Yeah, 10.5 at minus 115 seems about right. Yeah, I'd still consider taking the over for that. That is a lean of mine. So we'll see where I land. Let's take a look at Rudy Gobert. His points prop 14.5. Does have a significant size advantage in this game, but he's only hitting 3 of his last 10. 4 games against the Warriors since he joined the Timberwolves, and he's gone under in 4 consecutive games. His rebounding prop 13.5. He's covered this in 8 out of his last 10 games. He has only hit this in 1 out of his last 4 against the Golden State Warriors. Jumping into OKC now. OKC versus the Milwaukee Bucks. So Chris Middleton and Giannis Antetokounmpo, their game time decisions in this one are most likely to play. So I'm not too worried about that. Let's go through the OKC Thunder first. We'll start with SGA. So his points prop 31.5. 30, sorry, I'm so used to seeing 31. 30.5. He's got a great matchup here. The Bucks allow the second most points to point guards on the season. SGA's covered this in 5 out of his last 10 games. The last time he played the Bucks was in 2022, and he scored 29 points. So that head-to-head data is not too relevant in my opinion. 5 out of his last 10, though, he's covered this points prop, and he has a good matchup. Looking at his assist prop, that line's at 5.5. He's hitting 5 of his last 10. Rebound wise, that line's also at 5.5. He's hit this in 6 out of his last 10. I personally don't bet on SGA much at all unless I choose to take an under. I did take his under in first quarter points against Toronto. The line was at 10.5. The line's now 9.5 for minus 115. And that has hit in 6 of his last 10. He has gone under the last 2 games. He's played the Milwaukee Bucks in the first quarter. But the one thing that concerns me is just the matchup. The matchup is a nightmare. The Bucks not great at defending point guards whatsoever, so I'm worried SGA can get active and have a big first. But at the end of the day, 9.5 points in that very first quarter, still a pretty tall task. So I'll leave that down as a lean. Actually, I've talked myself back into it, but I don't mind it. Who else have we got here? Lou Dort. So I'm only looking at Lou Dort purely because he's got a good hit rate of his points prop as a late. Check this out. His line at 8.5. He's covered in 9 out of 10 games, which is pretty crazy, right? Head-to-head matchups, 1 out of his last 2. It's minus 135. When there's 2 games where he just went half a point over here. Doesn't have a lot of volume. Only takes 8 shots per game. Shoots him at 50%, so you'd really be looking for that. He's shooting 3-pointers at 47%. Actually, let me just check to see the matchup when it comes to 3-pointers. So the Bucks allow the 3rd fewest 3-pointers to small forwards on the season and the 12th fewest 3-pointers made in general. So, yeah, Lou Dort may not have the advantage here when it comes to shooting threes, and that's where half of his points, well, not 75% of his points come from 3-pointers. So, yeah, I considered he's over in points, but after looking at it, I've decided not to take it. Let's check out J-Dub, Jalen Williams. His points prop, 19.5. Tough matchup here against Giannis. He's covered this line in 6 of his last 10 games. He's gone under in his last 2 games against the Milwaukee Bucks. In those games, last season, much smaller role. His assist prop of 3.5. He's hitting 4 of his last 10. Gone under in 2 straight against the Bucks. And his rebound prop of 3.5. 6 out of his last 10 games. And he's gone over in his last 2 against the Bucks. So I'm not feeling J-Dub in this one. Let's have a look at my man, Josh Giddey. So I do have a lean on Josh Giddey, but let me get through each of his props, and we'll talk about it. So his points prop, 10.5. He's covered in 7 out of his last 10 games. Has covered in his last 2 against the Bucks, but keeping in mind, he was playing a lot more minutes back then. His assist prop, he's covered this in 7 of his last 10 games as well. 1 of 2 against the Bucks. And then his rebound prop, 6 out of his last 10. Had 15 rebounds the last time he played the Bucks. He did play 44 minutes, though. This game where he played 26 minutes is probably what you can expect to see. So, yeah, I don't mind that for Josh Giddey. But what I'm ultimately leaning for at the moment is I think I'm just really considering his PRA. So check this out. He's hit his PRA in 8 out of his last 10. He's got a good matchup when it comes to scoring points and allowing rebounds. So obviously the Bucks don't allow too many 3-pointers. Josh Giddey very well capable of driving to the rack, popping some floaters and stuff like that. So, yeah, I don't mind this for Josh Giddey. His PRA, that's something I'm going to be looking into after this video. And the last one here is Chet Holmgren. Now, he has a great matchup here against the Bucks. The Bucks, not great at stopping centers from scoring. Chet's last 3 games have been excellent. He's covered it in 3 straight, 4 of his last 10. Yet to verse the Bucks, though. Assist-wise, his line's at 2.5. He's covered in 3 of his last 10. And rebound-wise, the line's at 8.5. He's covered in 6 out of his last 10 games. So his last 3 games, he's covered his rebound prop and his points prop with relative ease. So, yeah, if I had to take a bet on Chet Holmgren, it would probably be over in his points prop, 15.5. Now, he's hit this 15.5 on 59% of the games this season, right? 59% of his games, 41 of 69 games. He's gotten the over. He also sees Brook Lopez, who I don't think can defend Chet, especially if Chet gets out on the perimeter. So, yeah, Chet's got a good matchup in that one. So I'm going to add that to my list of things to look into. God damn, it's a long-ass list. Jumping into these Bucks, I want to look at Malik Beasley here because I do have a lean on his. So his points prop at 10.5. He's hit in 6 of his last 10 games. Got a great matchup here against OKC. His assist prop, 0.5. He's hit that in 7 of his last 10. Rebound-wise, his line's at 3.5. Matchup's not the greatest, but he has hit in 6 of his last 10. And the lean that I'm considering for Malik Beasley, I can guarantee you that no one else is probably going to have a look at this but me, is this. His rebounds plus assists, looking at over 4.5. Now, he's hit this in 6 consecutive games. He's hit this in 8 out of his last 10. He's got a good matchup for rebounds. He's got a good matchup for assists. Now, he gets fuck all potential assists. And for those who don't know what that means, it's not many. He averages 2.2 potential assists per game, but he does get quite a few rebound chances, 7.5 rebound chances per game. And OKC, not the strongest outside shooting team. So if they take those outside shots, it's going to be long rebounds. Someone like Malik Beasley could take advantage of that opportunity. So that's something I'm going to be researching a little bit as well, but I don't mind that whatsoever. Let's have a look at Giannis now. His points prop, 29.5. He's covered this in 6 out of his last 10, and the matchup's not too difficult. His assist prop's at 5.5. He's covered in 6 of his last 10, and his rebound prop is at 12.5. He's got a good matchup here. 3 out of his last 10 games, he's covered 12.5, though. So, yeah, I don't often bet on Giannis props because they always feel like they're a little bit too high for my liking, somewhat elevated. Let's check out Chris Middleton. His points prop, 14.5. He's covered this in 6 of his last 10 games. He's got a difficult matchup here against OKC, though. Assist-wise, you're looking at 4.5. 6 out of his last 10. And his rebounds, 4.5, 5 out of his last 10. Tough matchup, once again, for Chris Middleton. Dame Darla, 24.5 is his line. He's covered this in 6 out of his last 10. He's had 3 30-point games in a row. Phoenix, Boston, and Brooklyn. Now, one thing I'm going to say is because I do this every night, I can already tell you what's a good matchup and what isn't. Phoenix, Boston, and Brooklyn, they're all one of the best matchups you can find for a point guard like Dame Lillard. They don't defend point guards very well at all. So I'm honestly not too surprised to see Dame hit the over in those 3 games. I actually bet the over in, I think, 2 of these games. I bet he's over in points. So anyway, 6 of his last 10 games he's covered this. The matchup, more difficult than what he has been seeing as of late. Assist-wise, his line's at 7.5. He's hit this in 5 out of his last 10 games. And rebound-wise, 4.5's the line. He's hit this in 4 out of his last 10. So I'm not loving what I'm seeing for Dame in this game. His shows some promise. His potential assists are a bit high at the moment, but yeah, form very much inconsistent here. Last, let's have a look at Brook Lopez. I haven't had a look at Brook Lopez in quite some time, so let's see what's going on. We know Chet, not a great defender. Does get some blocks, but not a great defender. So Brook Lopez, he's hit this line in 5 out of his last 10, so that's not too convincing. Has eaten the OKC Thunder alive, 25 and 24 points in his last 2 matchups against them. That was almost 2 years ago now, and Chet Holmgren he wasn't playing, so yeah, can't take too much out of that for Brook Lopez. He does have a good matchup, though. I wouldn't be surprised to see him to cover this over. I'm leaning to the over, and that's purely just a feeling. I've got nothing to back that up. Let's jump into the last game. It's the Indiana Pacers versus the Los Angeles Lakers, and you guessed it, Anthony Davis and LeBron James are game-time decisions once again. Joining them is Taurean Prince and Johnson for the Indiana Pacers. So let's get through this. I do have a couple of leans, and then we're going to be out. Let's take a look at the Pacers first. Tyrese Halliburton. So his points prop is at 19.5. He has covered this in two consecutive games now, 4 out of his last 10. Against the Lakers, he's had some success. He's covered this in 3 consecutive games. This prop's at 10.5. He's covered in 6 out of his last 10. And he's covered that in 3 consecutive games against the Los Angeles Lakers. Rebound-wise, 6 out of his last 10 and 1 out of his last 3 against LA. Points and assists, I don't hate them. I just don't really like betting on Tyrese Halliburton right now. Let's check out Spicy P, Pascal Siakam. I've got a lean on him, I'm pretty sure. Now, Pascal Siakam, his points prop, 22.5. He's covered in 4 out of his last 10. His matchups, not the most difficult one here against the Lakers. Assist-wise, 3.5 assists. He's covered in 5 of his last 10. And his rebounds have been crazy lately. Check this out. We did bet on his rebounds against the Warriors. I think I took the over 7.5, and he absolutely killed them with 16. The rebound matchup here against the Lakers is a difficult one. They allow the 3rd fewest rebounds to power forwards on the season. Spicy P's covered in 8 out of his last 10. The lean that I'm looking at here is his rebounds plus his assists. So the line's at 10.5 here. He's hit this pretty much since he's gone in this big rebounding streak. He's covered this with relative ease. It's a good matchup for his assists. It's a tough matchup for his rebounds. But looking at game logs here, he's had tough matchups for rebounds before. OKC is an easy matchup. Chicago's an easy matchup. Brooklyn's a difficult matchup. Cleveland's supposed to be difficult, but no Evan Mobley makes it somewhat easy. Detroit, that's not a difficult matchup. And the Warriors, that's not a difficult matchup either. So he's only really had one tough game here, and that was the Brooklyn one. But I think that's also why we see his line only at 7.5, despite the strong form as of late. The matchup has been taken into consideration. So, yeah, I'll be looking into Pascal's rebounds plus assists. Let's have a look at Miles Turner, then we'll get to the Lakers. All right, so Miles Turner's 14.5 points line. Hit this in 4 out of his last 10. 2 out of his last 3 against LA. Rebound-wise, his line's at 6.5. He's covered in 6 out of his last 10, and he's hit this in 3 consecutive games against the Lakers. He actually has a good matchup for getting some rebounds. Miles Turner, the Lakers allow the 4th most rebounds to centers on the season. Yeah, Miles Turner, somewhat inconsistent. I'm going to add this to my list of leans. 6.5 doesn't feel like a big number for a starting center who's going to play 27 to 30 minutes a night. So, yeah, I don't mind that. I'll look into that one too. Let's jump into the Lakers. We'll start with Rui Hachimura. Now, I do have a lean on here for Rui. Let's check this out. So, firstly, if you're looking at his points prop, 13.5. He's hit this in 7 out of his last 10 games. He's hit it in 5 in a row. His matchup here against the Pacers is a great one when it comes to scoring points. Head-to-head numbers don't look great, but he didn't play too many minutes in those games. His role is very different now as a starter. His assist prop, that line's at 0.5. But he's hit this in 9 out of his last 10 games. So if you're gaming up, bet on Rui to get 1 assist and sweat your balls off, or you might get it to start the game. You never know. Rebound prop is at 3.5. He's hit this in 4 out of his last 10. The matchup's not overly difficult either. So the lean that I'm looking at, though, for Rui is just to take his PRA. PRA of 18.5. Check this out. 7 consecutive games he's covered this PRA. He's got a great matchup for points. His matchup for rebounds and assists is not too difficult. And you saw how well he was covering that assist line too. So I do like the 18.5. I'm going to research it a little bit further, but that's definitely one of my leans. I'm going to look at D'Lo here. His points prop at 18.5. The matchup's not too bad, but it's not an easy one. He's only hit this in 5 of his last 10. Very inconsistent as of late. Only scored 13 points in his last matchup against Indiana. Assist-wise, you're looking at 5.5. He's covered in 5 out of his last 10. Got a difficult matchup here against the Pacers, but he did have 7 assists against them last time. So, yeah, D'Lo, I'll be avoiding you, that's for sure. LeBron James, his points prop 26.5. He's covered this in 5 out of his last 10 games. He's got a good matchup, of course, but he has gone under in 3 consecutive games against the Pacers. Looking at his assist number of 8.5, 7 out of his last 10 games, and he's got under in 3 games against the Indiana Pacers. His rebound prop, 7.5. He's covered in 5 of his last 10. He's starting to rebound a little bit better over his last 5. 4 of his last 5 games. He's got a good matchup, and he's covered in 1 of his last 3 against the Pacers. If I had to take a LeBron James bet, I'd probably lean to the under here of 34.5 points plus assists. The Pacers don't allow too many assists. Do allow some points, but I don't think LeBron James is going to be required to get all these points for some reason. But he has hit the over in this in 7 out of his last 10. So I'm just not going to bet on LeBron James. It's as simple as that. I'm not confident. I'm not touching it. Stone Cold Steve Austin Reeves. His line is at 14.5. He's got a good matchup too. He's hit this in 6 out of his last 10, but he's gone under in 3 straight. He scored 28 points the last time his assist prop, 4.5. He's hit this in 4 out of his last 10. Tough matchup. He's got under in 2 consecutive games against the Pacers. So this is actually one of my leans, and I'm leaning at an under 4.5 here for a few reasons. 1, he's hit the under in 6 of his last 10. 2, the Pacers don't allow many assists to guards, full stop. So they allow the 3rd fewest assists to shooting guards on the season. He's gone under in 2 consecutive games against the Indiana Pacers. He's averaging 8 potential assists per game in his last 10, which means he's probably going to land on about 4 to 5. But given the difficult matchup that the Pacers present, I feel like the 4.5 is a great number to bet on, especially if I'm getting it at plus odds. Got me a little bit aroused there. So looking at Austin Reeves' rebounds now, 4.5. He's hit this in 7 of his last 10. Tough matchup once again. Went under in 2 straight against them, but he has been rebounding quite well as of late. Lastly, let's look at Anthony Davis. Street closed Davis. 25.5 points. Hit this in 2 out of his last 10 games. Tough matchup against Miles Turner, but he's been cooking him in the past. 41 points the last time he versed the Pacers. His assist line, 2.5. 8 out of his last 10. 2 out of his last 3 against Indiana. and his rebound prop 14.5. He's hit this in 4 out of his last 10. Had 20 rebounds the last time he versed Indiana, which is just crazy. So, yeah, I don't bet on Anthony Davis that often. I feel like if I bet on him, he'll get injured halfway through the game. But, hey, that's just Anthony Davis, you know what I mean? Pumping the brakes real quick. Now, don't you dare end that video because I got a few things that I got to say. The first thing is a reminder that if you guys are choosing to tell me, don't just bet on the parlay. Don't bet on the BAP only, that badass parlay. If you're going to tell me, tell the single bets too. The single bets have been hitting quite well. I'm obviously betting a lot more on the single bets because I'm more confident in them than I am on a badass parlay where I reduce the lines down, because everybody says it. Single bets are the way to make profit, and that's what it's all about. I do this for fun because I enjoy it. I like the analytics. I love the sport, and I like making profit. So betting for profit's always good. So if you're going to tell me, make sure you tell some of those single bets too. Don't just put everything on that BAP. Second thing I wanted to talk through was I really just wanted to get your feedback on this. I've seen a few questions about it, especially when I wear the Daft Previews merch. Pretty much probably a year ago, my channel was a lot smaller back then, so I probably jumped the gun in trying to sell merch. I created all these Daft Previews merchandise, shirts, hats, and a lot. Created the website, spent a lot of money on it, created the designs, and then no one was buying it. My hypothesis at the time was, like, your market is gamblers and sports bettors. They prefer to spend their money on betting than they would on buying merchandise. But I have seen a few comments over the past week, people asking about it, especially when I wear it. So I want your thoughts and your opinions and your feedback. If I created another website and if I designed some new merch, would that be something that you're interested in? It'll take a lot of time. It'll cost me a little bit of money to get that stuff started. But if it's something that you want to do to show your support, it's something I'm down for. So let me know in the comment section if you're down for some merch. If you're not, just say so. I appreciate it. If you say nothing, I get nothing out of that. So let me know what your thoughts are, and I'll definitely take it all into consideration. But look, that's a wrap on today's video, lads. We've been killing it. 20 units this week, 5.8 units yesterday. Hopefully we can keep the train rolling. These Sunday games haven't been the best for us for the past couple of weeks. Weird things do happen on Sundays. I'm starting to believe that. But I'm going to stick to my processes. Nothing will change just because it's a different day. I'm pretty confident we'll get out of there. We'll figure it out. I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.
Up to the channel cause your boy's getting busy. Coming to you live from the west side of Sydney. We've got the free picks and the juice on the daily. It's all free, you don't even have to pay me.